Hi, everybody. Welcome to our PTSA and SEPTA Superintendent Forum. We're excited to welcome you, whether you're here sitting with us or at home. I'm Tammy Black, co-president of the PTSA, and we're glad you've joined us. It's a wonderful opportunity to ask questions of our leadership and be a part of things happening in this amazing district. We've gathered questions and comments over a number of weeks from the community, and we'll ask those questions in a bit. We have some exciting things that are going to happen before we get to our questions. I do want to just share that we did get some questions that are similar in nature. So all questions will be asked, but I might blend just to be mindful of time. Since this is a virtual event as well, we are recording, so people will be able to view this on our district website shortly. And we have a Q&A, so you're able to pop your questions in from home and we will be able to ask. So with that, I'd like to introduce our amazing panel to you all. Next to me, Dr. Samansky, our Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. Next, we have the amazing Maureen Caraballo, our business official and treasurer. Then, of course, everybody knows Dr. Bill McCursey, our superintendent. And last, at the end of the table, we have our Board of Ed president, Alex Del Piaz. And with that, I'm going to pass the microphone down to Alex.
Tammy, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I want to first thank the PTSA and SEPTA for sponsoring this budget forum. There's so much that goes on into the budget, and it's the opportunity to share some of the details. I think really help it help bring people out for it, help it be supported. So I'm going to sort of summarize a little bit of the process that the board went through. The headline is that this budget passed the board 7-0, and on a numbers basis, we all agreed with it. The final number, we're going to be raising the tax levy 3.19%, which is actually below the median for Westchester and Putnam school districts for this year, as it was last year. And so we would have agreed with the number as it was, but also the process that the administration went through, and I'll get into some of the details, and the process that they brought to the board was extremely commendable. Especially, we had one issue around funding for a teacher in the music department, and there were a lot of ins and outs to that. There were a lot of nuances, and that was brought and examined thoroughly, and we all felt very prepared and informed about it. So there was, just want to commend the administration for the process, but also now for the result, because the lay of the land this year in the budget process was unusually complex. We had, as a school district, an unprecedented amount of push ahead. So that's the amount of money that just year over year that we're contractually obligated to spend. That was over $1 million this year. We also had lapsing of COVID-related federal aid. And that was not just open-ended dollars, that was aid that was linked to specific programs within the school district. So the math interventionist, the DEI coordinator, these were things that we had to find a way to fund ourselves. These are not cuts that would just go somewhere else. They were, specifically tied to programs. On top of that, we had the proposed cuts in New York State aid, and not just cuts in the numbers, but cuts in the whole structure of how state aid has run for the past 20 years. And on top of that, we also did not have a state budget until about 2 weeks ago. So we had to plan, sort of reading the tea leaves of what was coming down from New York State. And in all that, the board had communicated to the administration that our mandate really was to not cut programming and to avoid putting the district in a position where we would need a tax cap piercing vote, because those are coin flips at best. And there are districts around us that are in that situation. There are districts that had to cut quite deeply. So, all of that was the background that went into it. And so it's with great pleasure and pride that we arrive at a budget that is very normal, because the work that went into this was exceptional. And I'll also add that how we got here is also thinking about the runway for next year and for the next years. There are some, even though the final budget passage of New York State restored a good amount of our aid, there were cuts. in the aid and inflation measures and things like that. And one of the things that was funded in the New York State budget was a commission that is going to look at how to redo the state aid formula. And that commission is not an open-ended thing that has a deadline that's going to put the result of their work in the next budget cycle next year. So the outlook for state aid is complex, to say the least. So, and part of the, responding to what we see ahead of us, this number wasn't achieved just with the use of reserves. We have ample reserves, commendably. We use some of it, but actually, now that we're getting more state aid back, it's going to be used to refill those reserves. And so there were substantive changes made in the structure of staffing and things like that really took an opportunity to put us on a sustainable path for next year, whatever comes, and hopefully for the next few years. So thank you very much for doing that amount of work. I hope I summarized it properly. Yeah.
Well, I could drop the mic literally and figuratively right now because you nailed it. So thank you very much. Forum's done. No, I got some people to laugh. That's my goal in life. One day get a laugh. Each day get a laugh. So right now we can see the screen. We're seeing the presentation on the screen. I'm assuming that's accurate. And Maureen and I'll open up and then Maureen will follow. But I do appreciate Alex, and I'll use first names here. That's the Hastings way, at least amongst adults and students, is that we really appreciate the work with the board on this. And Hastings, a 7-0 vote from the board is quite significant, very important. Many who are listening, many here in the room tonight, followed us very closely. So, for a good couple months, rightly so, the board, and one of their key roles with fiduciary responsibility is adopting a budget. And rightly so, they probed with lots of questions. As I say to the people who work with me, the board's currency is questions. That's their job, to raise them, and they may go down to great detail. A good board comes with that detail back up to a higher policy or procedural or a budget vote, and the board did that. They looked at what we brought for this year. They looked at the future years, as Alex has explained. Let me just hit a few key narrative points on the budget. Some of whom have been following us. This will be a good repeat for you. For those of you who are just now tuning in to decide how you want to vote on the 21st, hopefully this will help frame your decision. But this budget is about giving us the resources we need for our children, so that we can provide K-12 and even some high schoolers. They're about to head out. Sometimes that phrase children reminds us that we're working with young people who we have to be thinking about wholly and fully. And I've come to say that really is a key Hastings way, that we care about our total student here. And I think the parents and the families, the community value a district that cares about that whole student. This budget gives us the resources to do that. Portrait of a Hastings learner. That's our strategic framework, our strategic vision. We're building that out slowly, and it's important we're building out slowly. Dr. Szymanski, who's the point on that, loves to say, I got to put the pedal to the metal on this, which I appreciate. And also we want to go at a pace where we'll gradually bring people on board. That is a very good philosophical, intellectual framework now for who we have been in Hastings and who we aspire to be. If you go out and look at statements on portraits, and now portrait is a popular thing, to have a portrait of whatever your district name learner instead of a strategic plan. You go out and look, and ours feels fresh, ours feels us, ours feels Hastings, and that's because it had bubbled up from us. But that's a key framework for us now, and it leads us to think strategically. The budget, to put a little more of a focus on it, allows us to maintain all of our core programs now in our resources. The music program is a good example. Lots of good discussion with families, children, students, alumni, external professionals in the music world concerned. Brought all those to us. We kept listening. We reiterated that all the programming this year will be the same programming this next year. If we find we're in a rough spot on that, we're going to look at it. We're committed to maintaining that same quality of programming. So I just use that as one little example, but this year's programming and resources, that's next year's. And that's very deft work by Maureen, the principals, Melissa, and the rest of the leadership team to let that happen. I want to stress that we are continuing to provide opportunities to students at any point in their continuum as it relates to their courses. We've maintained good class sizes, and that's a question we'll get to later that was raised. We are maintaining at the high school courses that become the end of a run for our students, and 90 to 95% of our seniors have been here since often first grade. And so you don't want to, even in a small high school, take away an opportunity once that junior, senior's gotten to that point. So we still have some high school classes that may have smaller enrollment, but I'm proud that in Hastings we've held on to those courses and have not shortchanged a student suddenly at the end of a run. Professional training is very important to us. That's in this budget. I'm glad the board endorses professional learning. You look at any organization that there is beyond education, the better ones are investing constantly in the learning and growth and development of their employees and staff. So that is something we have to do here in Hastings. And facilities are quite significant. We have a parallel process underway regarding a potential bond in the fall. Please don't confuse that right now. This vote on May 21st is about our operating budget. That's a critical vote. We will be back with more information as to a potential bond vote in the fall, and I think Maureen can speak to that a little bit. But this budget does more immediate operating support work for our facilities. Alex hit a lot that's on this slide now in front of you. Significant external pressures. We feel very proud that our budget is at that 3.25 level. As you look around it, if you will, if you want to sort of say, how does Hastings compete? We're competing very well in this regard. Supers across the region are now very good colleagues of mine, so I want to be cautious as to how much I might compare, because our network's vital to what we do in each of our own districts. But we're doing very well in terms of what we've been able to bring to you at the 3.53%. So lastly, I would just emphasize this is a budget that allows us to have robust programming, soup to nuts, A to Z, all aspects of our children, all their needs, all their wants. We are addressing those with this budget. And I think we're now ready.
Oh, yes. Oh, no.
Community expectations. I think this is clear. We build a budget related to a community that rightly so is looking for high quality, robust academic programs, looking very much at a variety of extracurricular programs. We provide those. We're going to continue those. Social, emotional well-being is very, very important to us. Again, that's that idea of Hastings caring about the whole student. The class size we're holding on to, facilities, and let me finish this, the idea of safe and secure schools. Families, the community should understand that we have very safe schools, very secure schools, and we care about that. And now I'll turn it over.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, the next slide, we went over these numbers earlier. It's just that budget growth number. The one I will just pull out on this is that there is something in New York State called the tax cap levy. I know many people are familiar with it at this point, but the piece about the tax cap, and when we're doing our budgets, typically, occasionally a school will try to override a tax cap, and what that means is they need a supermajority vote. And they're very rare, and many times they're unsuccessful. So I think a lot of the challenges, not only Hastings, but other schools are facing is trying to bring in budgets when there's like a set amount of money that we can only raise to. So you're starting off, regardless of what your expenses may be or your needs may be, you immediately have this limitation on the amount that you can really raise. And then that's why each year looking at a budget, we really do start from like ground zero and look and build from a place of need for the upcoming year. Because as Alex mentioned before, and I won't, bore you with the details, but if you look at our budget to budget change number in terms of dollars, our budget to budget change was over $2 million. But that tax cap calculation, which we were limited to 3.19% this year, which, believe it or not, is a higher number than we've seen in other years, only allowed us to raise, not only it's a good amount of money, but almost $5 million worth of additional tax dollars. But as you can see right there, there was about between those two numbers, there's $500,000 that needs to be closed. And how do we do that is by either, as Alex alluded to, state aid is the second funding component of our budget. And even any slight change in that, either up or down, really has a significant impact. So thankfully this year we are seeing a few $100,000 more coming in through that line. And that's where we're able to close that the delta between what our budget to budget growth is and the amount we're actually able to increase taxes by. This is just here for the record, and it's just simply to demonstrate there's a very rigid calculation, and each district has a different calculation number, except for the inflation factor. But again, this number at times, depending on different numbers that were given by the state, could even be as low as 2%. And as an example, had that been the case this year, we would have had, hundreds of thousands or $500,000 or more or so of additional reductions we would have had to find or close gaps. Again, I just included this as part of this presentation because again, this is information that we've shared many times before, but again, this is really, as I had mentioned before, it really does create quite a challenge. Years ago when we developed budgets and the tax cap wasn't in place, many times we were even below we only really raised what we needed to, but we were able to respond to things if there were expenses, and now we're really limited in our ability to exceed that cap. And as is just noted on here, if there's any changes that occur between the budget setting and when we get into next year, we're constantly having to modify or address sometimes unanticipated expenses that come up. We set our budget, we build it, and then, then you have a whole school year that you have to go through, and any unanticipated changes to that have to be managed. As Alex had mentioned before, and this is just, again, to give you a little bit of a flavor for some of the things that each year drive our budget, and of course, there's other items as well, but as we entered the year this year, it was really over. It was probably closer to about $1.8 million of year-over-year expenses. Just saying, okay, everyone comes back next year. What does our budget go up? And just beyond our contractual increases, which again every district has, one of the things in many districts like ourselves, it was a difficult budget year. We have been seeing the last few years very, very high increases in health insurance, not dissimilar to every company and anyone who has health insurance, I think probably may see that even in what either they're paying or paying into their, or their employer's paying for them. So between the last 2 years, our health insurance went up 20%. But when you factor that we have $7 million worth of health insurance costs each year, that's a significant number for us. In addition, our retirement expenses, again, have been going up. And even if that number shifts from say 8.5% or and these are percentage increases. So if the rate that we need to pay in is 9% of wages and goes to 10% of wages, 1% of $30 million is, $300,000. So even those, something on paper, so, well, I want 9 to 10, I mean, not each thing has an impact. So very, very quickly, just rolling over our budget, we have these large kind of expenses. And as Alex mentioned earlier, we did benefit, as did many districts, of having federal COVID dollars that flowed into districts for, it was about 3 years of funding, right, Melissa, between different grants and such. And, during that time, it really did allow us to address and create some needs that existed in the system. Alex alluded to some of them, and although some of them were partially funded locally, we were able to expand some of those roles, and we wanted to keep those. So as you can see, those were things that we also had to roll into our budget this year. And in addition, we did, as part of the budget this year, similar to where we may have reduced some teaching staff where we didn't think we needed as much, we did need an increase of our special education staff at the middle school, and that's about 2.0, two new full-time teachers there. Oh, and also an increase to our theater program, which is booming, and we've have so many students involved that we did increase some funding there to address that. As Alex said, I think this slide here is, we do have a good budget, just to kind of bring it back to what Bill said. I think we're very happy where we landed, and we're able to meet, keep everything that we had last year. And also, actually, as I just mentioned, either fully fund or increase staffing where needed, and, keep all the complements of things that are offered for our students. But one of the things as we developed the budget, and we did spend a good amount of time with the board as required, is we not only look at this year's budget, we are required to develop and present to the board 5-year budget financial plans, and that those are constantly each year. And we use those anyways, internal working documents, but it's, it's extremely important because, certainly as you're making any type of decision, you have to make sure that it's sustainable and affordable and you can continue with it. And with the budget growth, as you can see, just those year-over-year expenses and the inability or the challenges with the tax cap formula, really kind of you can, as we look at it, so if we're contemplating, I mean, there was some discussion last night at the board meeting, the desire to expand our science research program, which has been spoken about for a few years. And it was really something I think that we had hoped or tried to include in our budget this year, but it just wasn't possible. So although it's one of those things, like even if we were able to find monies for 1 year, can we afford to, we don't want to add things and then end up like cutting elsewhere to fund it. So, but there are other opportunities and things do change, and that's how you're able to add things over the years. And there are things such as that. But one of the things that Alex alluded to that is of a great concern for me, maybe, is that the governor's her proposed budget this year would have I believe significantly impacted districts like ours. It's because she is proposing significant changes in state education funding that have adverse impacts to districts like Hastings. And I get it because the state only has, only a certain amount of dollars. So I understand as a governor, she's looking at the entire state. But I think that being said, we, as I had mentioned, even if that dollar amount is flat, that's a problem for us. We need that inflationary growth on those numbers because our expenses are going up. So if the state aid remains flat and we have more students or more expenses, that actually we're kind of starting out off in a hole there as well. So, and we have, although the state funding last year was significantly above what we had seen, just even a hint of that being rolled back in any way does concern us because as we mentioned, every few $100,000 we does pay for something. So we're keeping our eye really closely on that. And again, just in terms of what, as I mentioned earlier about the health and retirement expenses and health insurance in particular, and we were advised with our provider that to anticipate another anywhere between 8 to 11% increase next year. So again, those are numbers, and that's based again on their 5-year planning and their projections based upon the the expenses that they're funding and all the rest. So, and as Bill had mentioned too, we just always have to keep some dollars we have older facilities, great facilities, but that do need to be addressed, and that's also something within our budget we are required to have monies for. And then again, I feel like, well, my things are really negative, but no, but the last bullet there too, and just to keep, as we all have been experiencing, the cost of a lot of things has gone up significantly. So that's also a challenge. But as Bill started off with the positive, we are very happy with our budget and very happy that everything that we're able to offer. I was going to say with the music, arguably we're offering more next year because we're going to have 8th grade music. So that's even general music, which does not exist this year. So actually we're going up in music. And so I think that's the end of this presentation. Yes, it is.
On a positive note.
I
There you
did.
go.
I did. Thanks.
Fun.
Yes, I know. So very, yes, I do. There's,
Stop sharing that,
you-
correct?
yes. Okay, I'll hand it over. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That was a great presentation and just demonstrates all the hard work and teamwork that goes into the budget. And with that, I'll get to these wonderful questions that have come in. So the first question is about communications. There have been huge improvements in transparency and the degree of communication on the budget process, so thank you. I suggest adding to the momentum by experimenting with more ways to reach the community and grab people's attention. A simple infographic showing how tax dollars are used, a one-pager that can be shared and posted, profiles of kids and teachers supported by the school system, things that make the community proud to be a part of Hastings, but that are bite-sized.
So very much a comment, very much a statement with some good insights in it. I held holding up, which I'll do now, the Hastings Happenings, the newsletter. This year we've had 2 printed newsletters out. We'll try and get back to that pace, maybe even a third. We don't want to just be out with a printed newsletter when it's budget season. So actually, we really think that we've upped the game with this, but it's about 8 or 9 pages. I don't know if there's time between now and the 21st, but this lends itself to exactly what this questioner's asked. In here, we feature, for the first time in a while, feature 8 or 9 students with their personal statements about why Hastings matters. Just to look at the 2 seniors, very well known to everyone, but they're seniors who've been here since about, if not kindergarten, first grade, and are going off to do wonderful things next year. They're wonderful spokespeople for the district, but we could excerpt that. There are other things in here we could excerpt. So I think it's a great suggestion. I would advertisement, look in the mail, regular old fashioned mail for the hard copy of this. We've also kicked it digitally. A lot of care went into this. Our communications associate has done a lot of great work on this, Jackie Saviano, trying to really kick the game up. And so I think going forward, we can look at some of those great ideas.
And I just want to, just with the enterprise now no longer being published, we have started to strategize ways to ensure that we're getting things out. And that, as Bill mentioned, we were just talking about newsletters and just thinking of other ways to make sure that, because that was a good way for us to feature the school.
Thank you. Yes, changes. The next question is around class size. What are your thoughts on class size? Do you feel there is a tipping point when there are too many students and that has a negative impact on learning? Can you share more on how we plan to balance the class size discussion with budgetary constraints? Is there a number that you think is concerning? For example, when we get past 24 kids, is that a red flag? As we hire new teachers and administrators, what is the philosophy and hiring strategy? How does the teacher shortage play into this?
So first, I'd like to say thank you for the questions. They're all very complex without a clean, exact answer. So I'd like to begin just by presenting some of our class size data. So our current class size ranges at the elementary school are about 17 to 21, and at the middle school, 21 to 25. At the high school, 19 to 23. And what we try to do, especially at Hillside, is keep the lower grades with lower numbers. And we do have a commitment, even in a difficult budget year, to have good class sizes and including high school classes that may have smaller enrollment numbers so that we can make sure that we have lots of different offerings and electives because people have different interests. So we want to make sure that students moving through the system have broader paths. So there isn't a perfect answer because something that's a more specialized niche type of class, or something like a student advisory, for example, where you really want that social emotional one-to-one point with the adult who's facilitating, you do want to keep certain things smaller. And there are reasons to offer larger classes or smaller classes. So that said, I also want to note, just having been a teacher in my past, there can be larger class sizes with more complex student needs, and there can be smaller class sizes with larger complex student needs and vice versa. So it really, there has to be a balcony approach to thinking about class size. But there also has to be the dance floor approach where you're actually looking at the configurations and then thinking about who the class makeup is and why you would have a larger versus a smaller class. So I'm not avoiding an exact number. There just isn't one. And actually, if you look at research on class size, you can have a study that has a conclusion, and then you can have another study that refutes that conclusion. So it's pretty complicated. And additionally, when we think about classroom space, so when we're thinking about aspirational learning goals and how students are engaging with the learning program, we want to also make sure that we have enough physical space for them to be doing that. So that matters as well. And arguably, you can change the room that something is working out of. But again, when you look at a master schedule and you look at space considerations where all spaces are being used, it's not so easy. So all of that said, I think we're doing very well. And when we're thinking about what is generally accepted by the community, so over many years, there has been a class size study, for example. And typically that number that's been used over many years is how many classes over 25 students. And so we are doing very well. keeping those numbers as low as possible. And then also agreements about class sizes have been memorialized within the collective bargaining agreement, and that's available online. You can look at that through the business office. And there are some for each building and age range. There are markers that are ideal, and there are markers that are desirable, and then there are markers that are acceptable. And again, we're really doing very well with most of our class sizes sitting within that ideal range overall as an average in each building. And so that is my position on class size. I think it's constantly something to be paying attention to, centering the needs of students, looking at the program, and balancing that out with budgetary considerations and, who we're staffing. That's very important.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melissa. The next two questions are around staffing. In an effort to be mindful of time, I'll ask both questions at once, and then I'm going to pass the microphone over to Maureen, who will address both in her answer. After looking at neighboring Westchester districts, it is evident that Hastings pays its teachers at the lower end of the pay scale for the county. It is understood that these salaries are negotiated with a union. However, on job postings on OLAS, there are salary ranges which are on the lower end. Are we trying to attract new teachers? Do we value teacher experience? Are we worried we're going to lose talented applicants to other districts that pay more? The second question. Since we have a lot of teachers retiring soon and will need to fill many spots quickly, can you please explain how we are making ourselves competitive in the hiring process, salaries, perks, etc., in order to secure the best candidates?
So first, I just want to start off with the first point that was made, that was that our contract was at the lower end, and that's not the case. And what I refer to, and what people in my position, we use data that's collected by Westchester Putnam school boards, and we are all required to submit all of our data, and it's actual data. It's all of our contracts, our actual expenditures, and they look at the contracts in totality, and they do a ranking based upon looking at the actual wages paid in the contracts and all the rest. So based upon, there was a time we were a bit below the median, and I mean 10 years or plus. I think out of the 46 or 48 districts, the contract ranks about 14th, which, you're talking about, you have districts like on the top that are like the Scarsdale, Bronx. I mean, now actually Bronxville is lower than us, but, the ones that you would imagine that would be higher, Chappaqua, Scarsdale, but overall, that's a kind of a known Harrison. Some of them, they're very wealthy districts. They have huge tax bases. Many districts, when we look at our counterparts in the river towns, I think our contract might be it's definitely second. It's not probably first. Ardsley, Hastings, Dobbs, and then Irvington, compensation's lower than ours. So many of that is just not the case. And again, that's data, that we do receive. And that being said, amongst all the districts, except for those really few districts up at the top of the food chain, most of the districts, somebody could be slightly lower. We could have a ranking of 2 or 3 higher than another district, and maybe it's $1,000 different. Talking about most teachers in Westchester County are all making them within a range. There's not a 3,000, 4,000. You're not talking about 30,000. You're not talking about within. It's all within what I would view as being the same somewhat. And there are other things within each contract and benefit package and we do want to remain competitive because we have excellent teachers. We have excellent staff overall. I think we always have come to negotiations. And I think the one thing I know for myself, as long as I've been here, it's always been about maintaining and sustaining. And it's not about trying to save money on people's, but you know what I mean? It's really just looking at all the needs in the system and trying to responsibly put forth what we believe we can pay without putting ourselves in any need to cut staff and all the rest. So that's a philosophy. But I know in terms of the OLAS posting, there's a new requirement by the state to post salary ranges. Now, some districts may put their whole salary range. Others, we've noticed, although it's a legal requirement, are excluding it. That really just speaks to, especially if it's possibly a case 6 position or certain positions, it isn't unusual for districts to try to bring in new staff. You have people who retire. There's a piece in which like that is something you do, and also it's a profession. Many of our teachers who retired worked for us for 35 years. They also were 25 years old at one point, or 30 or whatever. So I think it's not unusual to replace staff with newer people. And if you're comparing a person who's worked for 25 years versus somebody 5 years, there is a differential in their salary. So we do post based upon what we believe. And then if there is a need and we feel as though we've either are unable to secure, we can repost with it. And we're also able to negotiate a higher salary if we need to. So, I mean, that's always been the approach here. But again, we do, and I personally, and I know all of us, we do look at what's being posted. I look at OLAS also. So I think it's something that is always a thought. And I think that's why it is important for us. But, beyond that, we also want to make sure we have enough money for our existing staff too, and to ensure all the obligations are made and keep our contract competitive. So that's a lot of words, but just to say, I think that does occasionally happen. And only because I know sometimes even for myself, if you pull out one piece of data, but not look at it in total, and the way the clearinghouse will look at it is they look at over the course of a 10-year, trajectory in your career. And there are other benefits such as the amount of time people work in classrooms, meaning each district is different in that. So some districts, that's what I'm saying. That's a part of what I would say occurs when Dr. Szymanski speaks to candidates. She's, of course, going to not only the financial aspects of Hastings. Hastings is a wonderful place to work and people like working here. And I think we always want to make sure that that's one of the main selling points. And we want people to want to be here. And of course, if we have to be increase what we offer people, we do it. And I think most people who come here don't regret it. So I think that's also a piece of onboarding people, just talking about the community and the value we place on our teachers and the working conditions. So even beyond the dollars that we may post.
And I'll just briefly add, one of the things that I like to make sure our candidates know about is that we have a very strong faculty with a spirit of collaboration, of helping others on board as part of the induction process. It's a warm and it's a welcoming community. And so our teaching faculty is a huge asset. Our department chair people, huge asset. And then, Maureen spoke about the length of the school day, maybe something, working conditions in general. How many days are worked? What do snow days look like? Thinking about opportunities for supplemental pay, like a Schedule B or chaperoning or working at games. So not every district does that similarly. And so we're actually quite transparent about having the contract posted so people can comb through it as we're doing our recruitment and our hiring.
Thank you. Onboarding is such an important piece, and certainly something that can make or break, they say, within the first 90 days, right? Okay. The next question, it has to do with recruitment, actually. Melissa just touched on that a bit. With recent and upcoming retirements, what are we doing to recruit skilled teachers to Hastings?
So we are doing a lot, and I would like to recognize and thank Lynn Walker and personnel, who this is a labor of love for Lynn, and she puts a tremendous amount of effort. And then, of course, in general, our leadership team and everyone involved in the hiring process, all of our collaborators are doing recruitment efforts in different ways. So some of the avenues, we have OLAS, which is the online application system, and that's regional through our BOCES. We have AppleTrack, which is another platform where people go to look for positions. Indeed, similarly, that's another opportunity. We have been very active in diversity recruitment fairs, in partnering with local colleges and universities, trying to work on establishing pipelines, so student teaching and having observation hours, student observers through their coursework. We do a lot in terms of advertising in general through our superintendent and assistant superintendent and principal networks. We try to post early where we can. So if we know of an upcoming vacancy, we can get ahead of that. I sit on something called the Fordham Teacher Certification Programs Advisory Council. So that's through Fordham University. So there are a couple of us regionally who sit on that. And that is really a partnership. And even though it's specific to Fordham interfaces with other universities, and those universities are interfacing with the state to try to address some of the challenges related to teacher shortages. And we work together as a think tank trying to really think about the preparation process, but also the recruitment process, and making sure that we are incentivizing people to go into the teaching profession. And the people, again, who sit on that committee, we're thinking together with the university around potentially incentivizing in the different ways that that can be done. So this is not just a Hastings challenge. This is a regional challenge. In fact, it just came up in a study group that I was at with assistant superintendents around hiring, and certain positions are much more difficult to fill right now. But we are keeping our eye on it, and we are keeping our nose to the grindstone on it, and we're doing what we can for our recruitment efforts.
So I was just going to mention with the retirement incentive, the nice part about how that's structured is there is a set of teachers that are leaving this year, I believe 4, and then the remainder next year. So I think, Melissa, that gives us a long runway for recruitment of those. So I think that the structure of that we were very happy with.
Also, not as many goodbyes that way. Uh, The next question is around teacher deployment. It seems as if a lot of teachers are taking on 0.2 FTEs for more than just short periods of time to fill in for teachers on leave or open positions. Can you explain the district policy around this? Is it typically for emergency coverage? When is it used when it isn't for an emergency? At what point? How long will the leave be? Do you say that the leave is just too long and we need to hire a semi-permanent replacement? 3-month leave, 6-month leave?
So generally, we post our 0.2 positions unless there's an extenuating circumstance, or we are pretty clear that there's a very short-term assignment that needs to be picked up. And in many cases, a qualified 0.2 candidate is very difficult to secure because we're thinking about certification, we're thinking about hiring in the middle of the school year. We're thinking about where that 0.2 is within the week or within the school day for people. So it's very hard, although we generally do try to post it. Again, unless we know there's something very short-term and extenuating. So in many cases, what we end up doing is a member of the faculty will pick up a 0.2 per the contract rate, so for additional pay. And it's typically stopgap, it's typically triage, it's typically emergency only. It's rarely a long-term solution. And the HTA contract actually prevents the practice of doing that in the long term. It's really meant to be for stopgap measures. So we agree. We endorse that from an educational quality perspective. It's just that it's sometimes extraordinarily difficult to fill.
And there have been times where one position has been split amongst 5 faculty. I didn't know if that's what you were kind of referring to as well. And again, it's the same thing. And occasionally people, they may think they're going to be out for X amount of time. I think we always post, even when there's in that scenario where there was one teacher out and 5 others pick up the 0.2s, there's a constant recruitment going on behind the scenes because occasionally, well, I might say constant unless it's like, say, if it's like an unknown amount of time, or if the person's out and we have not found somebody yet. And, like any organization, sometimes people have an emergency and it's just can happen overnight and we have to react to it.
And sometimes the leaves change. A 3-month can become a 6 months, and it can surprise the person on the leave. And we just have to sometimes be flexible and make sure that we are honoring the person in the role, honoring the contract, and doing our best to fill those point twos.
Right. Following the curves of life sometimes, right? Okay, the next question is around staff diversity. I would like to understand our community's requirements for hiring practices and what we are doing to make sure that teachers' racial, ethnic identities are in line with our students' increased diversity. What are we doing to support teachers of marginalized groups? What can we do if we have an uptick of teaching professionals from marginalized groups?
Okay, so it's actually illegal for us to hire based on race and ethnicity. Districts have to hire the most qualified candidate, the strongest person for the position. And that said, we are deeply committed to having a diverse pool of candidates. And so there's a lot that we do around diversity recruitment fairs. We've done the Rivertown's Diversity Recruitment Fair. We've done the Lower Hudson Council Diversity Recruitment Fair. We've been doing outreach to historically Black colleges and universities, outreach to sororities, engaging in individual networking, outreach by administrators, outreach by teachers, so that we can get a strong pool of candidates and a diverse pool of candidates into the pool, into the process. But it is actually illegal for us to hire based on race, ethnicity, gender, age, any of those characteristics.
Thanks. Okay, shifting a bit to the new Title IX regulations. How are you approaching the Title IX revisions from the federal government slated to go into effect in August? Will you be working to make sure that all children, but especially girls, are able to access safe locker rooms, bathrooms, and other private space?
Yeah, so these regulations, like all of them, kind of came upon us, and it is something we're aware of and working through with our facilities team. We already have had identified some spaces, but currently we are looking, especially in and around the sports, because it's allowing now students to access whatever locker room where previously we would have a separate space for them. So I am working closely with Joe with some summer projects to, ensure that we're in compliance with that come the start of the school year.
Thanks. Switching gears yet again. A hot topic always, technology. So the question here is the school reassessing its tech policy in light of growing evidence of the negative effects of screens on kids' social and educational development?
So I'll pick this one up. Certainly Melissa and Maureen may want to add to this, and then actually what I'll refer to Alex has been part of. But as I've said in I think it was a March or even more recently Friday letter, and I put a stake in the ground on establishing a technology committee. It was required we do that, but it was important we do that in a way that was inclusive and looking very much at our policies, our practices, our procedures, and that committee's now met twice. And we're starting from the ground up, if you will. So the committee's been, and includes students, parents, and does include teachers and administrators. What I mean by the ground up is we have policies. That committee, at the most narrow formation reason, was solely policies. And I know they said, no, let's look from the ground up. Well, what do I mean? We've been getting a lot of input from families. So we started with an exercise of, I put on a chart the 15, 20 themes that we've been hearing that include the question about screen time and the negative effects of social media, et cetera, all the way through logarithmic tracking and all the rest. But the whole set was there. And so I had the group begin to prioritize there to say, just from this information that we're hearing from families, what's most important most immediately? It's all important at some point, but what's most important most immediately? Then use that information to juxtapose that to the technology plan we have that's required by the state of New York. Maureen and Melissa were instrumental in shaping that plan, having it submitted. And so now if you're following the logic here, looking at what families are telling us, taking those concerns, looking back at what the goals are of that required technology plan to see where might we freshen up those goals, where might we make new ones, et cetera. And then look at what our policies are. Some would say establish the policy and then fill in, but when you're active in something, it's actually sensible to say, where are you? How does your policy framework support the best of what you're doing? And where does your policy framework make you adjust what you're doing? So it's a very real, active area for us. I intentionally delegate. I intentionally empower those around me because I believe better work gets done that way than if it's all sitting with the superintendent. This is something I'm holding on to, as you will, if you will, as the chair of that process, very actively involving others. But that's my statement on how important it is to me professionally and personally. We will be reporting out at the end of June to the board as to where we are now, but this committee will continue on through the next year and will remain very active. There's a group of parents who've come together to put together ideas independent of that committee process. They reached out to me today. I got right back to them to say, let's find a way to sit down. I believe strongly in those closest to a child in our district should be most immediately involved. And so far, my years, that's worked very well. Because if the superintendent leaps in to get involved at the classroom level, usually the superintendent makes a mess of it. It's most important that those most directly involved. In this case, it's a bubbling up of ideas from a range of families, range of parents. So it's very important that, you know, in the tight time at the end of the year, I think I may have the two people to my left, maybe another principal, sit and just listen, see how we fold those questions and concerns into what's happening with the committee. So that should say to you, one, we have a committee. We have, I think, a thoughtful way of looking at that through that committee at our work, and we're going to have parallel processes as a way to learn. And next year, we will look at ways of where we may need to make some changes, make some adjustments, but based on that process. Want the mic back?
Thanks. Okay, our next question is around behavior incident communication. How are we doing in communications across the different schools in regards to racially motivated events? As an example, I understand correspondence was sent to fourth grade parents around a game the kids were playing where the N-word was part of a joke. As a parent to children of color, the lack of communication related to racially related events is increasingly problematic, and more so, our lack of acknowledgement to the community at large.
Excellent question, a difficult question, but the exact question to ask. Since I've been here, I've insisted on zero tolerance. One, it's the law, but let me hear the word. It's morally, ethically, and legally important we have zero tolerance. Let me ethically, morally, legally. So even if the law weren't there, I would insist on zero tolerance for any of these pieces. Second, we're educators. And we have to approach any of these issues with children making unfortunate choices, some cases really bad choices about what they're saying. Here, very clearly, verbal stuff becomes behavioral stuff. So if children are saying things that are hurtful, and all we have to do is look what's gone on recently, even today in Congress, and I'm going to come to that in a second in terms of David Banks and other superintendents who are called before the Congressional Committee on related issues. I'm going back to what happened for a set of university presidents, where a number of them struggled with, if students are saying something, does that rise to the level of a violation of the code of conduct? Here, language rises to the violation of the code of conduct. So we don't tolerate it at all. Now, as educators, what we've been thinking about and trying to put in place, and this will be something we'll keep working on over the coming years, is what are we communicating when to families? And if you might think very simply about concentric circles, if something is, no matter what, when we know about it as educators, we are addressing it and dealing with it. If it's one child, a couple children, whatever, we are dealing with it. And if families know of things that they don't think are being dealt with, they need to get to that teacher. If they're not satisfied, they need to get to the principal. If they're not satisfied, they need to get to Melissa and me to say, something's happened, we need to talk. Sometimes people say to me, I'm nervous to come forward because I'm concerned about retribution. I've been in this business since 1981. Do the math. Everywhere I've been in education, I've heard that retribution fear. I have never seen it happen. It's never occurred, and people work with me, dare I say, for me. No, I have no tolerance for that type of retribution. So people need to feel free coming forward when they hear and see things. So, for example, the individual questioner here, it would be very important that we talk directly at some point about this. Let me come back to the concentric circle. If there are 1 or 2 students involved, those families know directly, and we're working with them. If there needs to be accountability relative to the code of conduct, we do that, but we also are trying to look at a restorative level. Where does it need to help children learn through this? So even if there's discipline, there's going to be a restorative piece to it. If multiple children are hearing something such that we want to make sure families are aware of that, what may go home, even if they're not most directly involved. So let's do the 4th grade classroom example. Then a communication did go out to Hillside in general, because it was enough of a class that we felt that could have traveled out and about. And we wanted to support families at home. So when any number of the Hillside children came home and may have said something was going on with this game, that the families knew about it, that letter got home before the children did that day. I was part of reviewing the letter. Amy Kazis, Mike wrote it. We would have had Janice involved. She was rightly away for some family, very important family events. She felt good about that. In this case, we respected her time on that. She will be increasingly involved in reviewing any of these things. But there we felt it had to go building wide. If it's something that has bigger, stronger legs and it's going to travel beyond a particular building, that's when a communication would come from me as superintendent. I am confident that we are on top of everything we're seeing and hearing. Having said that, if there are families that are saying you're missing something, I need to hear about it so we can dig in and work with this. I do feel, and sometimes people say comparisons get you nowhere, Bill. I do feel that we are more overt and definite about communicating these issues than many, many other educational institutions. And what becomes the dilemma is, are you helping people, or in a sense making the situation more problematic by creating some imagery that may not be accurate as to how children think and act? But very simply put, we take these things very, very seriously, zero tolerance, and we will hold individuals accountable. That's a tough word to say, but we will do that, but do that educationally in a support way. There are some families that would say, even the note that went out regarding that Hillside incident, that should not have gone out. And I would respectively disagree with those families. And again, I would talk with them directly if they wanted to speak, just to help support individuals. One thing that's really important here, and this is tough, is we have children 7.5 hours a day. We have them 5 days a week. There is so much out there out of our reach as educators every single day when a child's away from us. This is something where we have to be in a partnership. And IWG, we're going to meet with them again in a couple of days, Melissa and me, and that's part of what we're saying. Scott Wynn, brand new leader in the district, is having that very supportive but direct talk with families to say, we have zero tolerance. How can we work with you, though? I live in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm walking around with my 4th grader. I'm going by a basketball court. Some boys are shooting hoops, and they see some kids walking further away, probably of international in some regard. I'll just leave it that general. They start making fun of them. You know, it's abhorrent. So my tough decision with my 4th grader there is, what do I do? Do I go intervene or not? But if there's those, it's constant. Or what is out on, as we know as parents. I'm a parent, everyone in this room is a parent, everyone's listening as a parent at some level, aunt, uncle, or in some regard, you've got family. What our young people are seeing on social media now, what they're engaging on, what they don't understand, what they should or can't share is a problem. So it ties right back to the technology question. So I would just urge any family concerned, feeling questions, reach out to me. If you feel uncomfortable with that, reach out to Janice, reach out to someone you know and trust. If it's another parent who then may feel they can raise it for you, but we need to be in dialogue.
Thanks. So our last question that was sent in ahead of time, but of course we are going to open up to the floor and to our virtual world. But our last question that was sent in ahead of time. There appears to be less involvement in district-wide activities and causes, volunteering, fundraising, etc., by parents of preschoolers and elementary-aged children as compared to years past. What do you feel your role as superintendent is, and how can you address this?
Well, I think again, it's almost a full circle because the first one was on communications. It was in a sense, what more can we do to engage families? Is there more bite-sized ways to engage? Here's a suggestion. I think the PTSA SEPTA are great partners. The boosters are great partners. The music parent group are great partners. Next year I'm open because this year's almost done. Open for coffees, open for smaller gatherings. If you as parents say, we want to have a sit down, a conversation, that would be a new piece. I had done some roundtables this last year in my office. I've continued some of those. They're very conversational. It's very, I think, a good way even to say, how do we talk some more? Some people to my left suggested that idea. I can't take credit, so they know who they are because they're smiling. But I think some of that very tangible, but it would be through PTSA and SEPTA, or other entities, where people know families, parents, particularly our younger ones, and can connect a bit. I try not to be a superintendent who's a dad, because at home they say, forget about it, Dad, just leave that be. But it does help me that I got everything from a 4th grader through a 27-year-old. And there are moments, I don't play it a lot, but I've found in some tricky moments and tough moments for a family, I'll share a bit. And there's been some connection there. So on this one, knowing how busy it is to have an early elementary student, a little past that now, she'll tell me, but an early elementary student, how do you fit that in as a parent? And to talk with people about that. So there's some ideas there.
Yeah, and then I think we also talked about like featuring or making sure that it's prominently featured all the things that our community partners provide for us too, doing like as we talk about communications and maybe connecting that with some of the newer parents, they see the benefits of that as well. 'Cause there's so much that goes.
And just to remind everybody, the PTSA and SEPTA, we are so open to ideas, parents reaching out, wanting to get involved in a bite-sized way or in a big chunk of time. We welcome ideas and support. So please do get involved. And with that, do we have any questions? None through the chat. Any live? No. Okay. Wonderful. Well, we made it in an hour. So that was wonderful. So with that, I thank you all for attending. Please, please, please remember May 21st, the polls are open from 7 a.m. for your early birds until 9 p.m. for the night owls. Please make sure to vote. It's so, so, so important. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.